Almost there. Almost there. Let's see if this works. Come on, Facebook. Okay, we are live. Welcome to the ancestral and eternal homeland of the Jewish people, everybody. It's Avi Abelow for today's Pulse of Israel, here with Jeremy Saltan, Knesset insider, political strategist, and all that other great stuff. Shalom, Jeremy.
Shalom, Avi. How are you doing?
I'm just trying to keep abreast of all these lightning changes taking place in the Israeli political sphere with the Supreme Court intervention day after day. If I remember correctly, last we spoke a number of days ago. I think it was Sunday?
It was.
Wow, what a different world we're talking about in terms of Israeli politics. We were saying that if we don't have a unity government by the time the Supreme Court ordered a vote for a new Speaker of Knesset, then we'd be going to fourth elections. And here we are on Thursday after more political drama. So what is going on, Jeremy?
So let's go ahead and I guess do a recap of what happened between Sunday to Thursday. What was supposed to happen on Sunday, at least, was that the expectation was that on Monday everything would be clear. The thought process was, and we did see that the Supreme Court went ahead and ruled that Edelstein would need to go ahead and allow the vote. Now, what the Supreme Court did, which was not something that we expected, was they did not make a decision on Sunday as they were supposed to. They took their time. By the point in which they actually made their decision final, it was already Tuesday. They asked that the vote be held by Wednesday. Instead of going ahead and bringing it up for a vote, what Yuli decided to do was to resign. Now, out of the situations and the options that were in front of him, he had a few options to go with. One was to go ahead and say that he's not going to listen to the Supreme Court, since it's quite clear for most people that what the Supreme Court here is doing is they're taking authority that was not given to them by any basic law. Of course, judicial review is something that's reserved for the executive branch of government. Since the constitutional revolution of 92, previous Supreme Court Justice Aaron Barak, what we have is a situation where they have unilaterally decided to go ahead and apply judicial review to the legislative branch. But this is really a new step in which they are interfering in the agenda. And of course, setting the agenda in the Knesset is a political issue. And the idea is that the judiciary is supposed to be the one branch of government which is removed from the political process and from political issues. And what they decided to do is insert themselves here. So what Yuli Edelstein could have done is to make the decision to say that he's not going to hold the vote and he is going to maintain his spot. Now, doing so would trigger a constitutional crisis, because you would be in a situation where there's a disagreement between the branches of government of who has what power, who has the authority, and that would put us in a very unusual place. Of course, we're in the middle of dealing with the corona, crisis, and most people did not expect that Yuli Edelstein would go in that direction. Another thing that he could have done was to take the option of saying, okay, they're forcing me to have a vote. I will go ahead. I will bring it up for a vote. I will not vote in the vote, but I'll bring it up for a vote. I will not put my candidacy up, but I'll allow the opposition to go ahead and field their candidate. And I'll just completely submit to what the Supreme Court is doing here. And that was something that, of course, the opposition, the left, were calling on the speaker to do. So what he decided to do is to go ahead and find a third path. He found a creative solution, which he said, I am going to submit to the authority of the Supreme Court. I'm going to agree that they have the authority to say that there needs to be a vote. However, I'm going to say that my personal conscience does not allow me to go ahead and conduct this vote. Therefore, I'm going to resign. And by resigning, the next person can go ahead and do as the Supreme Court sees fit. Now, this is a very interesting solution because what it tries to do is to balance between the two different answers. Of course, that doesn't win you many friends. If you're looking at ministers within government, led by Yariv Levin, but many others who joined him, they said going ahead and doing so is, again, just by submitting to the authority that the Supreme Court can tell the Knesset what to do, is in itself a very bad thing and should be prevented, even at the expense of not listening to a final Supreme Court decision. On the other side, you have the opposition who's saying by resigning, which is his right, he can't go ahead and resign. And then during the interim in which he still is the acting speaker until the end of the 48 hours, which is an important point to make. Once you resign, it's not immediate. There's a 48-hour waiting period until it takes effect. And to go ahead and to deal with the fact that the left is saying here that you need to realize that even though you've resigned, you're still the acting speaker. And if you have a final Supreme Court justice decision here from the court, that of course you have 5 justices on this. This isn't a panel of 1 or 3. Very unusual case, of course. So that's why you have a lot more Supreme Court justices. And of course, this was a 5-0 ruling, which fuels their argument that you have to go ahead and submit completely. So what Yuli decided to do was to balance between the two opinions and to go ahead and say, I'm going to go ahead and say I recognize the authority of the Supreme Court, but I personally cannot go ahead and do it. And what was decided in a subsequent Supreme Court case, which was brought forth before the court, the question of should Edelstein be held within contempt for not going ahead and failing the law as far as the people were petitioning that he did not go ahead and hold the vote on Thursday, right? On Wednesday.
Right.
We're on Thursday. We're on the day after. Now, according to the Knesset protocol, according to the law, I should say, after the 48 hours are over, which is tomorrow on Friday, Edelstein is no longer speaker. It's very unusual for the Knesset to convene on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. I can tell you as someone who's been working in the Knesset corridors in various roles for over a decade, I just don't remember the last time that we had a plenum session that was other than a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I just don't remember that. And what they could have decided to do is to wait till Friday and then conduct the vote on Friday, or alternatively, just wait till Monday. The date of Wednesday yesterday was an arbitrary date. This isn't a special time legally. This isn't a certain amount of days after the Knesset election. This isn't a new inauguration. This isn't a vote for a new Knesset government. There's nothing in law that goes in and says that there's any significance to the date of yesterday. And if the Knesset protocol says that once you've closed the Knesset for the week, which is what Yuli did on Wednesday, so he was still speaker, that should be enough. Unfortunately, what we did see is the result of that Supreme Court case, that they did decide to say that they are going to further interfere, meaning it was not enough for them to go ahead and to really put they put the gun on the table of Yuli Edelstein. They decided, even after he resigned, to say it wasn't enough that he submitted to their authority and recognized the legitimacy of their ruling, but because it was not happening within the timetable that they had gone ahead and set out, that they were going to go ahead and take the most extreme measures that we've ever seen the Supreme Court take until today. The ruling, which came out in the middle of the night, I don't remember, it was 3:30 a.m. It was, again, a crazy situation. But what happened in the second ruling is that they said that even though the law says that Yuli Edelstein is speaker, the Supreme Court is going ahead and ordering the Arrangements Committee, which is right now instead of the House or House Rules Committee, to go ahead and to convene and to vote in favor of having a plenum session special today on Thursday to choose a new speaker. Now, this is a problem on many levels. Again, if you're going to believe the constitutional revolution and that school of thought that there is a constitutional aspect to the basic laws, the basic law Knesset, then you have a very big problem here, because the situation which the Knesset gives 48 hours to the speaker to remain acting speaker is in the case that he might decide to go back on his decision and rescind his resignation. Another thing that they went ahead and did is said in the ruling that they will not recognize if Edelstein decides to pull back his resignation.
Really? I didn't
yes,
know. I didn't know that part.
It's it's not the longest of rulings, but there are quite a few paragraphs there, and that's one of the things they're saying. Regardless of what Yuli Edelstein does, as far as they're concerned, if you will, in name he is remaining speaker until Friday, but in terms of the authority of what the speaker is and has, that their decision was to go ahead and give it to Amir Peretz. Now, the law doesn't say that Amir Peretz should have it. In fact, the law goes ahead and says that it should be one of his deputies. There are no deputy speakers yet, because there has not yet been a vote for deputy speakers. Again, we should remind our viewers and listeners that it was only last week that this new Knesset was inaugurated. We've not had a lot of votes yet. We're dealing with a corona crisis in which most of the votes that are being held in groups of 3, 4. I think the maximum is 5 or 6. You just can't have everyone in the same room at the same time for the obvious reasons. And they're using the unique way of using a roll call through names. There's a lot of procedural things that you can do within the existing Knesset protocol in order to get around a lot of these logistical issues. But getting back to the main point here, they've decided that even though he is the speaker, they've taken away the authority from Edelstein, and they want to give it to Amir Peretz, who is what is known as the most senior. He's them with the most seniority within the Knesset. The way that it used to be before we passed the law in 2015, which determined that the previous speaker stays on until a vote for a permanent speaker, was that the original from the beginning of the state was that the oldest person in the Knesset, whatever the oldest age was, that person got a chance to do it. That was removed, I believe it was before the 2003 election, when we moved away from the direct elections and back to the Knesset system for electing a government, that it was decided that it would be the most senior MK. At the beginning, that was Shimon Peres for the first few times. Then afterwards, Michael Eitan, and then Amir Peretz. So now, as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, we're going to revert to a previous law. So you have here, just to break this down, the Supreme Court has decided that they are going to strip the speaker of his authority. They're going to strip his ability to be able to rescind his resignation. They're going to appoint who they feel should be the new speaker without it being written in existing law. And they went ahead and they also ordered the Arrangements Committee, which is a Knesset committee, to go ahead and to convene in order to call a session on a Thursday, which, like I said, at least in recent memory, I do not remember anything like that happening.
I'm glad you're putting this list together, because it's just crazy. Each one of the items you are listing are basically an additional overreach of the judicial system outside of its jurisdiction, based on no laws whatsoever. It's just making up stuff out of the top of taking out of the top of its hat.
Again, the rule of law, which is something that's very important in a democracy. And again, I'm a person who believes in judicial reform. But when you have this situation where you have people who are making a decision within the judiciary to, again, just make it up as they go along, they're finding legal arguments to do so. but again, it looks more like a bunch of lawyers that are trying to come up with some sort of argument, as opposed to actually doing something that's in the rule of law, that's actually written. Again, as I said beforehand, and I know many friends on the left don't like it when you use such words, but this is the most controversial decision made by the Supreme Court since its existence. This is very much moving into areas that it has never gone before. We know that the Israeli Supreme Court is very activist. It acts as a super legislator. It has a lot of issues. But what it decided to do, I guess you can say early this morning or late last night, however you want to view that, what they decided to do not so many hours ago is go ahead and take upon themselves even more authority than they ever had before. Once again, the judiciary is supposed to be removed from the political process. There is right now a political disagreement going on between the various factions within the Knesset. And what they have decided to do is insert themselves. And one of the most ridiculous things that's happening right now is that there are negotiations happening right now between Likud and Blue and White to see if they can perhaps postpone the vote anyways until Monday. So in that case, if Blue and White goes ahead and does that, then even Blue and White in the opposition will be in violation of the Supreme Court order as far as the Supreme Court is concerned. Of course, I'm sure they would not receive the same amount of criticism, but again, as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, the vote should have happened yesterday. It did not happen yesterday. Because it did not happen yesterday, it must happen today, and it'll be very, very interesting. Like I said, the ramifications if even the opposition, who again, it's the opposition who took this to the Supreme Court to make a decision, which again is also pretty low for people to go ahead and do that. I'll remind everybody that if the vote happens on Monday instead of the vote happening today or yesterday, it makes no difference in terms of what the long-term plans are for the legislative process of the laws that Blue and White and the opposition want to move forward with. But again, there was no specific significance to that actual day. And the reason why people don't like this idea of Monday, whatever, we have to understand that the way the Knesset works is the Plenum has a 3-day work week of Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And the Supreme Court could have already on Sunday made a decision. They could have made a deadline for Monday. And had they done so, Edelstein would have had the ability to resign. The 48 hours would have passed. And already yesterday on Wednesday, you would have had a new speaker. You would have had a vote for the speaker. It's just, again, to me, it's ridiculous that they're going ahead and they're trying to take the existing takanon, the existing
bylaws
protocol of how it is that the Knesset works, and to ignore that and to try to make up things, such as the Knesset is closed, such as democracy is over, such as we're in a constitutional crisis. Again, all these things are, if you want to be the most cautious, you can say they're premature. But if you want to go ahead and be more blunt, you can say, if anything, the one who's doing the overreach here is the Supreme Court. And what Yuli Edelstein is trying to do is figure out the best way that he can balance what he feels is right based on his conscience, while still respecting the authority of the Supreme Court as the branch of government that does interpret things. Now, the idea is not, as Benny Gantz said during his election campaign, that the Supreme Court is the top of all 3 branches of government. The way that democracy works is that you have 3 equal branches of government. That's the truth in separation of powers. Edelstein is going ahead and he's recognizing that even though he disagrees with the ruling of the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court can rule and determine what the final status to this should be. Again, there are a lot of people in the right-wing bloc that are very angry at Yuli Edelstein for this position. You can see also a number of MKs and ministers who have mildly come out against him in many ways. But the fact is that if you're looking at what the left is saying, if you look at their talking points, It's amazing because, first of all, they're not making a distinction or seeing the difference between Yuli's position and a lot of other people in the coalition. But beyond that, they don't actually understand the fact that what Yuli is trying to do is to avoid the constitutional crisis that they are saying that we have now entered. If anything, it's a constitutional crisis in which the Supreme Court is telling the Knesset what it is that they should be doing, what the agenda should be, what they should be legislating. That is a very, I don't. We've seen in previous Supreme Court cases where they have vetoed bills, they've overridden bills, they've sent to the Knesset a timetable of months, sometimes years, depending on the case, of going ahead and resolving it, but they never sent something to a specific committee. They never went ahead and had such a small amount of time in order to go ahead and actually resolve things. This timetable is ridiculous. And the last point I should make about the first Supreme Court case is that once Yuli Edelstein gave his response to what the Supreme Court was thinking of doing, they put out a 19-page ruling less than an hour after receiving the speaker's,
response.
Response. So the fact that we see that he has a very detailed response, and they pretty much, it's quite obvious they had the answer already written. They made maybe a few adjustments based on a few things that he said, but you can see there that a lot of those legal arguments are very similar to the first document, and they don't really go ahead and go section by section and deal with each one of the arguments that Edelstein has. Instead, they talk about the stuff that they feel that Edelstein did not address, as opposed to talking about the things that Edelstein did address. And that in itself is very, very, very problematic. But to summarize again, where we are from Sunday to Thursday, we're in a situation in which the national unity government is getting further and further away. If this does happen and we do have the vote at 4 p.m., we should summarize that the Arrangements Committee did meet today. Very small margin of 9-7. They voted for a special case to bring up the plenum on Thursday at 4 p.m., which is Israeli time, which is another 2 hours and 18 minutes. If this vote does go on as planned, this will end all national unity government negotiations and most likely send us on the path towards a fourth election.
So yes, I was going to say, coming to today, right now, national unity talks are taking place between the Likud party and Gantz's Blue and White party. From what I understand, if the vote at 4 o'clock is to appoint, what's his name from Yesh Atid? Mayor
Cohen.
Mayor Cohen. Then the Likud said all talks are off, and they're trying to have Gantz be appointed the Speaker of the House instead. So why do you think that we're not going to have a unity government? Because it seems like they're talking again, and the president last night pushed to talk again because of the coronavirus. It looks like Likud is giving in to more and more demands of Benny Gantz and the Blue and White Party, even giving into their demand of giving up the Justice Ministry, which is a huge thing for the Likud to give up on. Why do you think there won't be a national unity government by 4 o'clock or with where things are right now?
When I'm going ahead and I'm looking at what the Likud has done and the amount of concessions that they have already put forth, I just don't see any more room that they have. They're willing to give up the defense ministry. They're willing to give up the foreign ministry. Again, when you're looking at that, just for the significance of that, Naftali Bennett, who's the leader of the only other right-wing non-Haredi party within the Likud-led coalition, that's a big deal to take that away from them. If you see that the foreign ministry is being taken away from Israel Katz, who is number 3 in the Likud after Netanyahu, and Edelstein, who's number 2, who's the speaker. So if you have a situation where they're willing to give up Israel Katz's position, that's a very big, significant thing. And of course, the decision to go ahead and give up the Justice Ministry, which is always been very important to the right. Of course, there's a lot of significance that the left is putting on this because of Netanyahu's trials. Of course, the justice minister has no control over what happens in any trial, let alone the prime minister's trial. That's just a ridiculous notion. But the idea that the judicial system would now be under the executive authority of blue and white is a humongous concession. They said they were willing to go ahead and do that in return for at least maintaining the Homeland Security Ministry, which is in charge of the police, as well as some of the other certain security forces, such as Magav, the Border Police, and a few other special police forces. What you see beyond that is a situation of an agreement to a 50-50% rotation of government for prime minister, which is also a very big thing. If you look at the results of the election, forgetting the blocks for a minute, Likud won 36 seats, blue and white won 33 seats. There's a lot of things being said versus the 61 versus the 58 or 59 blocks, and the makeup of the committees there. You could very easily have, and that's what you did have in the beginning of the negotiations, the Likud saying that if you're going to care about every seat here or there, so then the Likud share should be longer than the blue and white share because we have more seats. Again, even that has been thrown out. They're agreeing with 50-50 split as well. If we're looking at additional things that they're willing to agree on, it just looks based on the cuts that they're willing to make, that the Haredim will not be a part of this government. It looks based on a lot of the stuff that they're looking at here, that a lot of the policies that the right wants to go ahead and enact will not actually be able to be pursued, because it looks like, again, they're going to have veto power over a lot of things, such as the application of sovereignty. So again, I just feel that Likud can't do more than they are already. I think that myself, as a member of the right-wing bloc, I don't like the sound of this government. I don't like the sound of seeing a lot of these people who I disagree with profoundly in terms of their political positions, taking up senior positions within this new government. The fact that Gantz will get a 50-50 share, whether they agree in the end, whether it's a year and a half or perhaps only a year, whatever it is, we've not had left wing in power for a very long time. Here we're going to have both a situation of an eventual left wing prime minister in power, but beyond that, we're going to have, even during the time where Netanyahu was still in power, a lot of the significant issues, as you've mentioned, defense, foreign affairs, justice, being in the hands of the left. It really makes one, wonder what else blue and white wants here. Because I'll tell you something about this national unity government. It's not going to be a right-wing government, not in policy, not in personnel, and yet it's not enough for them. So to me, when I'm looking at the fact that there's less than a little over 2 hours now until we get to that point before that deadline, I just don't think the Likud can give more. I think they've given the maximum. I think even the amount that they've given put them in a very tough situation, because as it looks now, again, based on the concessions they've made, they're going to be parting ways with the right-wing bloc. UTJ, Shas, and Yamina will be out. So when you're looking at what it is that they're trying to go ahead and here and do is really it's the maximum. Again, you have a lot of people who are right-wing. They voted Likud. They expected to get sovereignty. They expected to get a lot of things. And instead, instead of Naftali Bennett being defense minister or Yael Sheket being justice minister, instead of the Haredim being able to control interior and health and the appropriations committee and take care of their communities, it looks like instead we're going to be seeing things moved over to blue and white. So I'm frankly very surprised that Gantz is not accepting the deal that's on the table. It is a marvelous deal for him. It's the best deal the left can hope to achieve. They are really undercutting even more than Kahlon was able to undercut the right's agenda over the 4 years of the 2015 to 2019 term. And with the hands of the Justice Ministry, it's going to be just like the days where Tzipi Livni was Justice Minister from 2013 to 2015, where the person who's going to be appointing judges is going to be a left-wing person who's going to be appointing judges that disagree with the direction that we want to go in. Unfortunately, more of the people that agree with the type of decision that we saw by the Supreme Court early this morning. And again, I really believe Likud, they can't go more than they did. They went too far, in my opinion. And when I'm talking to my friends in the opposition, particularly within blue and white, they're saying that Likud has not really gone enough in our direction. We need a lot more. This is just not enough. Likud needs to give more. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, listen, if that's where the parties are at, this is just not happening.
Wow, and I think to strengthen your claim, I mean, it's been publicized already that obviously, again, we're all waiting for this 4:00 vote, whether either Mayor Cohen of Yesh Atid would be appointed Knesset Speaker, which then Likud said, that's it. We cannot have him as Knesset Speaker. National unity talks are off. Or if the compromise of Benny Gantz being appointed Knesset Speaker, which then they said, okay, with that, we can continue talking to attain a unity government. And the Joint Arab List already has come against, saying they'd vote against that. They are unfortunately and ashamed. They should be ashamed of themselves, blue and white and Benny Gantz, but they are a key part of their left-wing bloc. They said they'd vote against Benny Gantz being appointed. Lieberman said his party would vote against Gantz being appointed. I think you mentioned Tamar Zandberg of the Meretz, the Labor Party, said they would vote against, meaning his whole left-wing party are basically coming out strongly against allowing for the potential national unity government. They just want Bibi gone, even though it means no government, because they can't make a government either. Am I wrong there?
You're absolutely correct, and nothing has changed since Sunday. The mandate to form a government is with Benny Gantz. He does not have a majority to do so. He has 61 recommendations of people that hate Netanyahu. That's why he has the mandate. The people who recommended for him to form a government don't actually want him to be prime minister. They just didn't want the mandate to go to Netanyahu. It was a chess move to go ahead and block the other guy. And because Gantz has no majority to form a new government, he's trying to use the majority of 61, which he does have, to go ahead and to change the rules of the game in his favor. Now, how does he do that? He starts by going ahead and taking over the Knesset committees, which he already has. He's taken over appropriations committee, so he's able to deal with having all of the budgets that come from the Treasury. Remember, we have no state budget. So each time you want to go ahead and make a movement of government funds, you have to go through the Appropriations Committee. It was given to Oded Forer, who's number 2 in Israel Beitenu of Lieberman's party. They have control of the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee, so they're supervising everything that's happening in terms of the government over there. They created a new Corona Committee so that they could supervise that. That's a special committee. You have also temporary committees that were set up to deal with various issues within the Arab sector, as well as the Health, Welfare, and Labor Committee, a special committee that was set up and given over to the Joint List as well. So he's going ahead and he's using his majority in order to enact that. He, of course, has the Arrangements Committee chairmanship as well. Excuse me. But beyond all of that, he wants to go ahead and remove the Knesset Speaker so he can control the Knesset agenda. Last week, when the Knesset was inaugurated, he put in new pieces of legislation which are meant to prevent Prime Minister Netanyahu from being able to get the second mandate. And as far as they're concerned, that's not unconstitutional, which is quite ironic to me, because what they're doing is they're changing the rules of the game. Again, not in the middle of the game, but after the game is over and you're counting the chips. The way the law is that after the election, if the first mandate doesn't work, the second mandate gets it. And what Benny Gantz is trying to do is get the speakership so he can pursue legislation so that he can go ahead and move it over so that new law will prevent Netanyahu from getting the second mandate. And, that's why this week the right-wing bloc decided to go ahead and boycott the Knesset proceedings. Because what Gantz is thinking, and this is always a prominent, I'll touch afterwards on the issue of him, as a speaker candidate. He is always in a situation where he makes the worst political moves because he does not understand what the other side in front of him thinks about. Again, I can get into anybody's head, whether it's Tamar Zandberg or Ahmed Tibi, because I'm a political strategist as a professional, and I can go ahead and understand, again, in professional, terms, what the enemy is and what they're thinking. Gantz is not able to do that. He thinks that by going ahead and preventing the second mandate from going to Netanyahu, that the Likud will go ahead and send someone else instead. First of all, that doesn't work technically because it's a process to go ahead and set up a government, to set up a primary and to choose a new leader within Likud. But even then, you wouldn't see a situation where a candidate, or at least a viable candidate, would emerge to go against Netanyahu in a case like that. Beyond the fact that according to the current Knesset, the current Likud party bylaws, there is no leadership election scheduled right now anyways. So he'd need about, I think it's 3/4 of Likud in the Central Committee to request a vote. Basically, procedurally, that's not going to happen. Netanyahu himself is not going to resign. And beyond that aspect, you have the other side of it, which is that he thinks that the right-wing bloc will then, once Netanyahu is no longer an option, be willing to go ahead and break off and negotiate with him. And that's why Shas, UTJ, and Yamina said they were going to join Likud in boycotting the Knesset sessions to show them that this decision by Benny Gantz to go ahead and try to steal the speakership, again, it's not really stealing because he has the 61 votes, but I'm saying stealing it in order to pass this legislation, knowing that even though he has the government mandate, he's not using it to form a government. He's using it to change the rules of the game after the game has already been played. And that he shouldn't expect that after he takes that away, that we're going to then go ahead and negotiate with him. He's still convinced Likud, they'll throw him out. Maybe I'll get someone, maybe, someone in Yamina or whatever else. That stuff is not going to happen. And that's why you take the drastic measure, which we did, of going ahead and boycotting the Knesset proceedings, because you need to send that message that what it is that he's trying to do is a serious thing, and it's not going to help us, and it's going to go to a fourth election. I believe, by the way, that boycott was what led to these national unity talks. The minute Benny Gantz realizes, look, it's possible that they're really telling me the truth. Likud is not going to replace Netanyahu, and it's very possible that we're going to see the right-wing bloc isn't going to break off. So I really don't have any other option. I need to go ahead and negotiate with Likud. But it's also possible that he's not really going ahead and having his heart in it. It's possible that he's trying to use it as another negotiating tactic or a power grab, which takes us to this idea of him being the speaker. Look, Yesh Atid has made it very clear, even in a national unity government, they don't want to be a part of it. If there is going to be a situation where Benny Gantz does join, he's not going to be bringing all the blue and white with him. And the idea that Mayor Cohen, who's a person who, is very much liked within the activists of Yesh Atid, he's a former mayor, back from Dimona. He has a lot of the grassroots of that movement with him. These people are the biggest anti-Netanyahu people. And it's quite clear to everybody, whether it's Tamar Zandberg or Ahmed Tibi, that if Mayor Cohen is speaker, he's never going to join a Netanyahu coalition. So what the Likud said is that, we are looking at this as the end of negotiation, because we're not going to have a situation where the speaker is going to be unilaterally taken by you by force, again, using this unprecedented overreach from the Supreme Court. So what we're going to see here is a situation in which Benny Gantz realizes once again that he's made a bad political calculation. He said, well, maybe if I'm speaker, it'll work out. Well, what do we have? We have a situation where every member of his coalition bloc has come out publicly to say, and again, the Supreme Court is saying the vote needs to happen now or not, then, you're all in contempt of me. So you have a situation where Benny Gantz is really in a position where he has completely miscalculated. The Likud is not going to give him more than they already have, considering his position within his own bloc and the situation that's going on right now with the court case and where we are right now after it. He should just take the deal on the table, because his position tomorrow is going to be a lot worse than what his position is today. And unfortunately, like I said, I just don't think, for Israel's benefit, because for me, again, as a member of the right wing bloc, I don't want this, but for Israel's benefit, we need a working government. Just because we've had an emergency caretaker, sorry, not an emergency, but a caretaker government from December of 2018. And, we're almost here up against April of 2020. It's come time for a government. So again, Gantz should just, cut it, take what he can, and just be over with it. It doesn't seem like he has the courage to go ahead and do that. And it seems that he has miscalculated his strength and what the opposing side has been thinking in their calculations and what their chess moves are throughout this process. So I think that we're just, unfortunately, most likely, unless something changes, and hopefully something does, we're probably going to be doomed to a situation where we do have that vote at 4, where Mayor Cohen does take the speakership, and we do end up on a path that takes us towards a 4th election, which won't be now and won't be in a few months, but based on the current timeline, it'll probably be in about another 5 months from now.
Craziness. And then I've seen news of Yesh Atid, Blue and White, wanting to propose a bill that basically freezes the current situation for 6 months, which would allow Benny Gantz more time to make a government, or Yair Lapid more time to make a government. And then I don't totally understand it. Do you know what I'm referring to? And is that good news, bad news? What does that mean?
So what they're suggesting, I don't think they're going to go through with this. But what they want to do is they want to not extend the amount of time you have, but to stop the clock, right? We know that Benny Gantz got the mandate and he has 28 days. His time is running out. At the end of those 28 days, he can ask for a 14-day extension. That's open to him. It's an overall 42 days, though. What Yesh Atid is trying to do is check if this is something that they can get their people on board with, which so far they've not been able to, which is to freeze the current situation, to stop the clock where it is. By stopping the clock where it is on whatever day it is that they pass the legislation, they agree that they will continue with the certain interim government that we've had since, again, 2018, that it'll just continue on for 6 months or 4 months or however long it is that they agree on. When that time is over, they will go ahead and resume the clock and resume the coalition talks and the time of the first mandate at that point. And again, that's a creative solution you come up with when you see that you don't have a majority and time is running against you. Because again, Gantz does not have an ability to form a government. That's why we're talking about national unity. If the right wing had I hear a lot of people are like, let's just be against everything and whatever. The right wing also, unfortunately, right now does not have an ability to form a government. What I do think is possible is that if Gantz's time does elapse and the second mandate does go to Netanyahu, it's possible that Orly Levy moves over, and then from 58 you're at 59. And it's possible, I don't think it's very likely, but it's possible you'll be able to get a couple MKs from one of the parties somewhere to maybe not join the government, but maybe, do as the joint list we're going to do for Gantz, vote from the outside. It's possible. I'm not saying it's likely. But right now I'm looking at the fact that you have a strong 58 block for Netanyahu. And I'm looking at the fact that Gantz, based on the statements of the last hour, does not have the support of anyone in his bloc to even be Knesset speaker, forget about be prime minister. So I think that most likely what's going to happen is that they're not going to be able to pass this legislation, Yesh Atid, that will freeze the clock. I think the clock is going to run out on Gantz. I think he will ask for an extension. I do think Rivlin will give it to him. I think there's no real reason to go ahead and do that because I don't think that'll do anything. After the first mandate expires, there's 48 hours, which can it can come out to 3 calendar days, of course, in which Rivlin looks at 3 options. One is to go ahead and do a new round of consultations to see if anyone has changed their minds. He can do a second thing, which is to just give the mandate to whoever was second place, which is Netanyahu. assuming they don't pass legislation that prevent him from doing that. If they do, then most likely they would do, Rivlin would do the consultations. And the third option is to go ahead and say, I'm not going to give anyone a second mandate and to turn it over to the Knesset for the Knesset's mandate. And just briefly, what happens there is that after the second mandate is done, you have 21 days between the second mandate and the third mandate, in which any MK who's signatures is able to then receive the third mandate. In this situation, there's no parties, there's no blocks, each individual is separate. Theoretically, if someone gets signatures, even from all 8 parties, even though it's minorities in each one of the parties, it would still be enough in order to give them the mandate. If they get the mandate, then they have a shorter time of 14 days to be able to form a government. But even then, the third mandate has an extra caveat, which is that the Knesset speaker can delay the vote after the 14 days for up to 7 days if necessary. So you would have to announce whether you have it or not after 14 days. But the actual vote you could postpone up an extra 7 days. So again, if you're going ahead and you're looking at all of this stuff now, like I said, this is something that can take a very long time, because only at the end of that process would we start counting down towards a new election, whether it be 90 days or 80 days or however amount of days from that point. We're still already a couple months away from getting to that point. And I think that despite all this attempt to try to find creative legislation and whatever it is that we're going to do, most likely we're going to go the second mandate and then again into the 21 days. It's possible this time the third mandate is what's going to get us out of it. But the most responsible thing right now is for Benny Gantz to take the deal on the table, not have this voted for, or to have this voted for and reelect Yuli Edelstein. That's another option that can happen. If we have a national unity government, a great way to go about this is to, go ahead and have a vote and have Yuli Edelstein be, reelected as the speaker. If you have a situation like that, the Supreme Court would really eat their hat. But that would be the will of the Knesset, and that would be the will of, the Israeli people. Right now I hear everybody talking about you have to respect the majority of 61 and so on and so forth. Well, if we have to respect the will of 61, and that means right now they're able to take Knesset committees because they have the majority. If a majority of 61 wants Edelstein to be speaker again, then he needs to be speaker again. Right. If the will of 61 wants to go ahead and change the law to prevent Netanyahu from having a second mandate, and they send us to the fourth election, they can't stop Netanyahu from saying, when he goes ahead and he campaigns for a fourth election, that he wants to repeal that law and bring it back to the way that it used to be. Because again, if it's unconstitutional to say that, then it's unconstitutional to go ahead and legislate it in the first place. So one of these things that we have to see is a situation where we don't have these double standards. Unfortunately, the judiciary went into this political area, which they have at times gone into, but in the most rude way possible, at one of the most fragile times of Israel's democracy. And hopefully, what we're going to see out of this, and again, I'm not very optimistic about this, but hopefully what we're going to see is a vote at 4 o'clock in which Yuli Edelstein is reelected to speaker, but I don't expect that to happen.
Yeah, I don't expect that to happen either. But Jeremy, thank you so much. Received great feedback on your fabulous presentation, breaking it all down. So thank you very much. And just to end, I think with a note that I told you also when we spoke on Sunday, which is still very much apropos, I told you that I really see the actions of Benny Gantz and Blue and White in the biblical perspective as God hardening Pharaoh's heart. Even though Pharaoh could have gotten out of all the trouble with only one plague, with only 2 plagues, with only 3 plagues, it was because God hardened his heart and he ended up losing it all. Here, I see that's what's happening. At each point, Benny Gantz has the opportunity to be a prime minister, and no matter whether a national unity government or whatever other constellation, that it's not good for the right wing, and he is hurting, he would be hurting the right wing, and would be hurting Benjamin Netanyahu as well. He keeps on saying no, no, no for whatever reasons, and I'm hopeful that hopefully it'll continue with the same story. Then in the end, we will win out. That's the biblical perspective I'm having on all of this. But in the meantime, thank you so very much, Jeremy.
Of course. Thank you, Avi. It was a pleasure as always to be with you. And I hope we're able to put a little bit to ease a lot of the concerns and especially the misinformation that's been about.
That is for sure, and I'm extremely disappointed. I mean, at least in the Israeli press, we do have outlets that put out the truth of what's going on, especially with dealing with the Supreme Court issues. But in the English press that deals with Israel and Israeli politics, there's hardly any outlets giving across the perspective that it's the Supreme Court that's in breach of their jurisdiction, causing the constitutional crisis. And thank you for helping me have the information to be able to be one of those outlets helping.
I mean, I will say that I did have 4 interviews on Tuesday at the height of the crisis. Most of them were in English. So there are people that are having it. I think the problem, though, is a lot of times, even when you do have this information available or accessible, instead of it being on the front page, it's maybe on page 22 or 28. Or maybe if you're on a website, instead of it being on the front page, you have to make a few clicks to a few sections and then scroll down and find it on the bottom. So I think they'll go ahead and say, no, we are showing the other side or other sides or the full spectrum. Unfortunately, the placement, or perhaps it's not, the fault of the journalist, perhaps it's the fault of the editors that are choosing, again, what it is that they want people to read and what it is that people need to fish for.
Right. Well, Jeremy, until the next update, thank you very much. Stay healthy through this. It's crazy that we have to deal with all this petty politics while we're dealing with this crisis. So stay inside, stay healthy, and until next time, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining and watching and taking advantage of the amazing presentation we had here today with Jeremy Saltan. If you enjoy what you're hearing, first of all, share the video. You can like everything we're doing. If you're not yet signed up for our newsletter at IsraelUnwired.com, please do so you can get the updates because we are putting out this information for people to be on top of it. Signing off for the Pulse of Israel here in our ancestral and eternal homelands, the land of Israel here in the Judean Hills. Thanks, everyone. Shalom, shalom.